The social contract is a concept that liberals and conservatives interpret very differently. Those who consider themselves liberals tend to use the term in a positive sense, to encompass ideas of social responsibility and social justice, both of which are loaded terms in their own right. Conservatives tend to interpret the social contract as an extension of collectivism and therefore view it as an invalid and tyrannical construct. Most of the time, this debate doesn't go far beyond these two multiple choice options. And that's unfortunate because this is a false dichotomy. There are more than two ways of looking at this. Like it or not, the way that we conceive of the social contract, or the lack thereof, has a massive influence on the way society is organized. So it's in our best interest to re-examine our assumptions on this topic. So what is a social contract? The short answer is that the social contract is a set of expectations established by and enforced by a group onto its members. The term was first popularized by the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau during the Enlightenment period. Rousseau's concept of the social contract was unapologetically collectivism by force. He proclaimed that individuals should merge their rights and their will to society at large for the greater good, and that those who did not bend to the will of the majority should be forced to submit. Rarely are modern proponents of the social contract as honest as Rousseau was, but in practice, nothing's really changed. In modern times, if the majority, or more accurately the elected officials of a majority, wish to establish public programs and need to fund those programs, it's generally understood that this will be made possible through taxation. Of course, people who buy into this line of thinking promote the idea that people should happily pay these taxes. After all, it is our duty. There's that social contract that we're all part of. But the unspoken reality here is that those who aren't enthusiastic volunteers will be forced to pay. And if you refuse, you'll have your property confiscated and/or be thrown into a cage for a decade or two. No big deal, right? Now, the current way that most people frame this debate is a false dichotomy because though the political right does not acknowledge it, the fact of the matter is that they have their own version of the social contract. And philosophically, it's identical at its core. The majority of the political right supports forced taxation. They just have a different concept of where this stolen money should be spent. They also support collectivism by force in the form of the legislative, executive, and judicial systems, though they don't generally see it as such. The problem here is that people aren't being honest about the implications of their politics. The social contract, as it is right now, is a set of rules imposed by force upon people who are given no choice to opt out. And those rules change constantly because new laws are being written all the time. It is assumed that if you are born within a specific country, the government ruling that geographical region has the right to impose requirements and restrictions on your life. Whether we're talking about forced taxation, compulsory schooling, registering for a military draft, or mandatory vaccinations, the underlying issue is the same. Now, conservatives tend to refer to the Constitution as the point of reference with the assumption that this changes the dynamic. But it really doesn't. The Constitution is often referred to as a document designed to restrict government. But what most people overlook is the fact that the Constitution was first and foremost used to create government, with the understanding that this government would have power over the citizens. But did the people who wrote the Constitution have the right to give the government that power? In order for a contract to be valid, those who it claims to bind must agree to it in full awareness of the terms. In other words, there must be informed consent. Any contract that fails to meet these conditions is invalid, and therefore has no real or legitimate power, even if that contract is well written and noble in its intentions. A group of men 200 years ago sitting down and writing a document cannot hand power to a government today to seize your property by force or put you in jail for smoking a joint, or regulate how you build your house. Obviously, these kinds of laws were not the original intention of the founders, but the federal government itself owes its existence to the Constitution. In fact, this was the explicit reason why the Constitution was created. It replaced the Articles of Confederation, which was much more decentralized in nature. So even though the federal government is clearly abusing its power, its claims of legitimacy are rooted in the Constitution. So it's extremely important to question whether that claim is valid. Some use vague notions of democracy to try to get around this issue, but this really doesn't hold up. If 11 people are in a room and 10 people vote to take the 11th person's wallet and distribute its contents, is this valid? If not, then why would it be valid on a larger scale? Even if 100% of the population viewed the electoral process as legitimate and participated, which is clearly not the case, it still wouldn't change the underlying morality. Theft is theft, regardless of how popular it is. Now, on the other side of this, all societies gravitate towards rules. Humans tend to want structure. They want violent crime to be dealt with consistently and justly. They want certain activities like child slavery and child pornography to be prohibited. And most people don't want their neighbor to be dumping poisons into the ground that seep into the water table. This tendency to want to establish societal norms will manifest whether you like it or not, and regardless of whether you see deep philosophical problems with it or not. And to be honest, there are philosophical problems here. But in practical terms, we have to deal with people as they are, not as we wish they would be. Therefore, the question is really how this tendency will manifest and how we deal with it. In the current paradigm, both the political left and the political right endorse collectivism by force, without informed consent. So what would be the alternative? How can we address this tendency towards societal rules without degrading into what we have now? Say a group of people establish a club, and with it, a set of rules, and they open up membership to the public. If the rules were clear and membership is voluntary, then this would be a valid arrangement, as long as the members could choose to walk away at any time. If we were to talk about this on a societal level, membership would be citizenship. Of course, this implies that citizenship and the duties and/or protections that may come with it cannot be imposed upon a child and then assumed to be valid through that person's adulthood. Citizenship must be a conscious choice made in full awareness of the terms. Parents cannot make that decision for their children, at least not for their whole lives. Nor would it be legitimate from this perspective to have a gaggle of so-called lawmakers writing new laws willy-nilly. Writing new laws changes the terms of the contract. Changing the terms of the contract inherently invalidates that contract unless people voluntarily sign on to the new terms. Now, this is a radically different way of looking at human societies, and it is not something that could just be superimposed over our current system. In fact, fully coming to terms with its implications would inherently break the current system, because with it comes the realization that the government is operating on an invalid contract, and their so-called authority is little more than a self-serving fantasy. Once you see that, why would you obey them? In the early stages, you may give in out of fear of their enforcers, but when the enforcers begin to wake up, it's over. This whole topic may seem to you like a pointless philosophical exercise, but consider for a moment where we are headed as a society. All empires fall, and the United States is on its deathbed. The entire planet is going to be destabilized when this comes down. Many nations will collapse. How are we going to rebuild? Are we going to blindly recreate the current system from the same flawed paradigm? Or worse, do it on a global scale? Or will we learn from our mistakes? If you care about the world you're passing on to your children, it's worth thinking deeply about this right now.